This man was driving home from work when he noticed a hitchhiking girl trying to get home and offered her a ride. He dropped the girl off and returned home, not knowing his decision to help would shake up his life. Because when he saw the news the following day, he turned pale. Man helps hitchhiking girl to get home. The next day, he turns pale after seeing this on news. It was busy on the road, as everyone else's workday was over, just like Dennis. His job was far from where he lived, but he loved driving. He filled his time by listening to his favorite songs. As he was jamming to a great song, his attention suddenly strayed to a hitchhiker beside the road. A hitchhiker wasn't an uncommon sighting for him because he spent so much time on the road, and he would generally ignore them. But he was having a hard time ignoring the hitchhiker this time. Because this time, it was just a young girl who was in need of a ride. Dennis watched how many cars just passed by without stopping, and usually, he would be one of those people. But it didn't feel right to ignore a young girl in need. He signaled to the girl and parked not too far from her. "Can I help you?" Dennis asked when the girl approached his car. The girl approached slightly hesitantly and looked in the back seat before coming closer. Clever girl, Dennis thought. Eventually, the girl explained she needed a ride. "I need to get home," she said, and fortunately for her, she lived in the same city as Dennis, so he offered her a ride. The girl quickly entered Dennis' car and told him he could drop her off at the station. "I can get home from there," she said nonchalantly. The man didn't mind dropping her off there and drove off. However, the drive would take a while, so he tried to get some small talk going. But he introduced himself and asked for her name. "Harper," the girl answered, but that was one of the few things he would hear from her. He tried to keep the conversation going and asked her a bunch of stuff, but her answers were short if she answered at all. Her non-social behavior surprised Dennis. Dennis always assumed hitchhikers would be very social people, as they would always be in contact with strangers. But the complete opposite could be said about this girl. Harper didn't seem interested in Dennis or sharing stories and spent most of her time on her phone. An abnormally large amount of time, in Dennis' eyes. After a while and a good bit of effort, Dennis gave up. He tried his best to make the situation enjoyable, but the girl wasn't interested. All she wanted was to get to the station, and she had already gotten a ride. He accepted the situation for what it was but still found it strange. After a drive that felt much longer than it actually was, they reached the train station. Dennis understood why the girl didn't want a stranger to drop her off at home, and even though she wasn't the best company, he still asked if she would be fine from here. Harper simply nodded. Dennis took a deep breath. "Well, okay then," he said as Harper opened the door, but before he could say anything else, the girl stepped onto the pavement and slammed the door shut behind her. Dennis was left in silence, taken aback by her sudden leave. She didn't even thank him or say goodbye. Dennis shook his head and started the engine. What a weird ride it had been. He returned home with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was happy about the good deed he did, but on the other hand, he felt weird due to the girl's behavior. Something was gnawing at him, which he didn't understand. While he still tried to wrap his head around what had happened, Dennis suddenly noticed something in the corner of his eyes. When he was able to take his eyes off the road, he glanced over to the passenger's side. He was surprised to see the girl's phone lying on the floor. The girl's behavior was weird, especially about her phone, but that didn't matter to Dennis. Without a slither of hesitation, he turned around and hurried toward the station. It would take some time to get there, as he was already almost home. He hoped Harper hadn't already left without her phone. Dennis hurriedly parked his car and ran to the train station. It was the city's central station, so it was big and had many platforms. "This is going to be hard," he murmured as he quickened his pace. Dennis looked on every platform and shop, but the girl was nowhere to be found. When he entered the main hall, he looked around and let out a frustrated sigh. What now? Dennis asked himself. He thought about the situation and realized he had done everything that he could to return the phone to Harper. There was just one thing he could do now. "I will bring it to the police station tomorrow," he mumbled. But as Dennis returned home, he couldn't stop thinking about Harper and the situation. Why did she behave the way she did? And the thing that confused him the most was the fact that she lost her phone. She was using it constantly. How did she ever lose it? It all seemed very strange. The thoughts kept him busy for far longer than he wanted. Dennis tried to watch TV to keep his mind off it, but that didn't work. Eventually, he went to bed and read a book until he fell asleep. But he wouldn't be prepared for what the following day would have in store for him. Because the next day, he was reminded about the situation the moment he saw Harper's phone. Before going to the police station, he made breakfast and turned on the TV. He zapped through the channels and eventually reached a news station. And when he saw what was on it, he turned pale. A picture of the girl he dropped off at the station yesterday was on his screen. He grabbed the remote, put the volume up, and was surprised by what he heard. The report explained that the girl had run away from home and that the parents were very worried about her. Dennis was very confused about what he saw and heard. The girl had told him she was on her way home. Did she lie to him? Slowly but surely, it dawned on him. She did lie to me, he said to himself. Now that he knew that, everything made much more sense. His feelings about the whole situation were suddenly explained. Dennis felt weird after meeting Harper because his instincts were trying to tell him something was off. And not only his body, but now he looked back, it all seemed obvious. The girl gave so many signs that he didn't understand then. The situation had taken a turn he had never expected. It gave Dennis a new perspective, and with that perspective also came a new realization. Was this his fault? A new feeling slowly grew deep inside him as he started to blame himself. He had seen the girl and hadn't done anything. Dennis was probably one of the last people who really could have done something. He paced around the room, distraught due to his own thoughts. His mind was racing. How could he have been so stupid? All I did was help her get away, he shouted furiously at himself. But things were far from over. The news surprised Dennis, and his thoughts kept him busy, so he momentarily forgot the girl's phone. He kept pacing around the room when he suddenly noticed it on the table. He looked at the phone with a new perspective now. Harper had been so busy with it. Maybe it could help him find her. When he came home last night, the first thing he did was charge the phone. It was fully charged when he grabbed it from the table and turned it on. However, he didn't get further than that, as the phone was locked. But as he stared at the locked screen, his heart suddenly stopped. Because even though the phone was locked, it still received messages. Because the phone hadn't been opened since last night, neither had the messages. This meant the latest message was still visible, even on the locked screen. Dennis' eyes widened as he read the message. It didn't indicate anything good. Dennis' eyes reread the line multiple times, making sure he saw it correctly. You should come to me. I know where to find you, it read. Dennis could feel his heart pounding against his chest. The ominous message made Dennis think that Harper wasn't just running away from home. There was more to the situation. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense that something else was at play. The girl seemed far too nervous and secretive yesterday to be running away from home. She seemed scared of something, or apparently someone. Dennis felt incredibly guilty. He had to find this girl before this person did. There was no time to lose. According to the message, the person knew where to find the girl. So, Dennis got up and got in his car. He started his search at the last place he had seen Harper, the train station. It was a stretch, but maybe she returned to look for her phone. He quickly parked his car and hurried to the main hall. Like the evening before, he ran along the platforms, searching for the girl. But as the day before, his search was futile. The station was packed, but there was no sign of Harper. But then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Dennis turned around in an instant, hoping the hand belonged to whom he thought it would. And when he saw the girl looking at him, he couldn't help but smile widely. She was here. He had found her before the other person had. Things were looking up. At least, so he thought. because his smile soon faded as he noticed the girl was looking frightened. Even more than yesterday. She had approached and grabbed him but hadn't done or said anything since. So, Dennis took the lead. "What's going on?" he asked gently. But the girl continued to look around anxiously without saying anything. The girl straightened herself and looked Dennis straight in the eyes. "Do you have my phone?" she asked, trying to sound as confident as possible. Dennis had been so happy to find the girl that he had forgotten the phone. When he took it out of his pocket, the girl grabbed it from him immediately. Dennis was surprised by her action, but as she watched her look at the phone, he noticed a slight smile appear. Then she suddenly turned and walked away, but Dennis was quick to react this time. He grabbed her by the arm and repeated his question. "What's going on?" his tone now more severe. He loosened his grip on the girl's arm because he didn't want to scare her. Dennis really felt guilty about it and wanted to offer his help. But to be able to help her, she needed to talk to him. The message made him really concerned about her safety. "Please, tell me," he pleaded. The girl looked around nervously and remained hesitant. Then, she looked Dennis straight in the eyes again as if she was determining if she could trust him. "Okay," she mumbled, gesturing for him to follow. When they were at a secluded part on one of the platforms, she started talking. Dennis listened intently to Harper explain the situation she was in. She told him she was home with her parents and her uncle was visiting. Late at night, she went downstairs to get something to drink, and she saw her uncle breaking open her parents' vault. "I filmed it with my phone," she added. Dennis couldn't believe what he was hearing and had a lot of questions, but before he could ask any, Harper continued. She was about to call her parents when her uncle noticed her. She barricaded herself in her room, and that's when her uncle started to send her threatening messages. "He would harm my parents if I called the police," she said while tears formed in her eyes. Harper managed to escape her room and ran away to protect her parents, but now her uncle was after her. Her voice trembled as she explained she was scared and didn't know what to do. Dennis was left speechless after Harper finished her story. He couldn't believe anyone would do this to their family or niece. His mind was racing, trying to process everything and think of a plan. Because the one thing he knew was that he was going to help Harper and get her back to her parents. The first thing Dennis did was try to reassure the girl and make her feel safe. "No need to worry anymore. I'm here to help you now. I will protect you," he said gently. Harper sniffed and looked grateful. It was like a wave of relief washed over her. But then came the tricky bit. They had to go to the police, but Dennis understood why the girl was hesitant. She didn't know what her uncle was capable of and didn't want to endanger them. "Your evidence is strong, so if we act quickly, they will catch him before he can do anything," he said to convince her. The girl eventually agreed with Dennis' plan, and the two hurried to his car, but when they were almost there, the girl suddenly released a big yelp of fright. "That's my uncle," she said as she pointed toward a man coming after them. Dennis urged the girl into his car and drove off. As they exited the parking lot, Dennis noticed a car following them. He paid close attention to it and soon realized it was Harper's uncle. His heartbeat fastened as he pushed down the pedal and raced toward the police station. "Come on," he grumbled to his car. They had to hurry. His mind was racing. The uncle was behind them and could cut them off when parking. They turned the last corner toward the police station when a reckless idea popped up in his head. He drove past all the parking spaces and parked his car on the pavement directly in front of the station. A couple of officers immediately noticed this and approached the car, demanding Dennis to park somewhere else. But as they got closer, the girl exited Dennis' car and started screaming at them. "Get my uncle," she screamed, tears rolling down her cheeks as she pointed to the car behind them. The police officers were confused by the situation. Two cars stood directly in front of the station on the pavement, and a little girl was screaming at them. A chaotic situation ensued as the officers weren't sure what to do. They decided to arrest Dennis and the uncle to determine what was happening. Once everyone was inside, the situation became clear. Now that her uncle was in police custody, Harper calmed down and was able to explain the situation. When she showed the officers the video of her uncle stealing from her parents, Dennis was let go, and they arrested the uncle for theft and threatening. The police officers safely returned Harper home, and Dennis accompanied them. Harper's parents were in disbelief when they heard the story and were extremely happy their daughter was back home. They didn't know how to thank Dennis, but he was just glad he was able to help out after his initial mistake.